Hello, book fighters. In the very last video, Dan suggested that when we read a book, if we want to do a video to post it on this channel so that the channel doesn't totally die even though we're not regularly reading it anymore, and I thought this was a good idea. So I'm going to do that even though I haven't actually finished a book completely. I'm reading Les Misérables, which is quite a long book, and it's divided into 5 tomes. That's what they're called in the French. And I finished the first one, Fantine, and I had some thoughts on it that were specifically on the structure of the first tome. So I thought I would talk about that a bit. In the first tome, Fantine, and in the character of Fantine, and in the events of this tome, we see the idea of the law pursuing justice. And this is illustrated further in the rest of the novel by Javert's pursuit of Jean Valjean, that the law is always chasing after, but is never quite able to catch justice. There's this idea that law, as it is dictated by a nation, particularly by a nation that is ruled by an empire or a monarchy, is imperfect and cannot actually achieve justice. The first character in which we see justice personified is in the bishop, and he is the one who finally delivers true justice to Jean Valjean that the law was not able to provide. The law punished Jean Valjean for the theft of a loaf of bread, but it wasn't able to achieve true justice because justice would have it so that he was not starving in the first place and didn't need to steal the bread. And furthermore, there's kind of the idea that 5 years for stealing a loaf of bread is excessive, which of course then got turned into 19 years because he tried to escape. The bishop personifies justice in that he is the one to finally deliver Valjean out of the darkness within his soul that was created not by his crime, but by the punishment for his crime. When he says to him, Jean Valjean, my brother, you no longer belong to evil but to God, or whatever, something like that. He transforms the evil that was growing inside Jean Valjean, the hatred that was growing inside Jean Valjean over the course of the 19 years. Jean Valjean was very bitter, very hateful of those who had thrown him into prison, of the entire system, of all of society, because he blamed society for his crime. And it is at this point that he begins to blame himself for his crime and to take responsibility for it and make amends for it, and through that, justice is actually finally achieved. The next character in this book to personify justice is that of Fantine. And Fantine, as you may know, if you have any familiarity with the story or have seen the musical or the movie or whatever, I'm assuming everybody has a basic idea of the story in this. Fantine is basically forced to become a prostitute to try and provide for her daughter. And so she is, again, society's failings cause her to commit a crime, even though I don't think prostitution was actually a crime. I don't know. But it is the failings of society that cause her to fall from goodness. And she is arrested for defending herself against the guy who threw snow at her. And when Javert tries to send her to jail for, I think, like 6 months or however long, she protests that her daughter needs her, that if she goes to jail and can't provide for her for 6 months, her daughter will die. And it is then that Jean Valjean comes in, and this time he is the administrator of justice, and as the mayor, pardons her, takes her to the hospital, because true justice would not punish her for defending herself, even though the law, as personified by Javert, would. Final and perhaps clearest place in the first tome that we see the law pursuing but failing to catch justice is in the trial of Champmathieu. Champmathieu is the guy who is believed to be Jean Valjean, and he is accused of being a thief and an ex-convict, and there's no real proof that he's a thief. They're just basing this on the fact of his identity of an ex-convict. And it says in the book, "Do not attorneys for the crown always proceed in this manner? He is supposed to be a thief because he is known to be a convict." And it just shows how the law as dictated by the monarchy is corrupt because it is not the law of the people. The courtroom in which this trial takes place is the seat of where law tries and fails to capture justice. The book says, "And from all this there was disengaged an austere and august impression. For one there felt that grand human thing which is called the law, and that grand divine thing which is called justice." And it separates the law from the justice, that the law is humans' attempt to capture the justice of the divine. A few pages later, Valjean is thinking back to his own trial and how there was no crucifix above the president of the court because there was a separation between church and state under the Republic, which was the current government at the time. He was tried originally during the Revolution. And it says God had been absent when he had been judged. And this literally is referring to the fact that there's no crucifix, there's no grasp for God in Jean Valjean's trial. But when we tie it back into the idea that the law is human and justice is divine, it tells us that there was no justice possible when Valjean was tried. The book does not just say that the law fails to capture justice, but it explains why that happens. Champmathieu says, "I don't know how to explain. I have no education. I am a poor man. That is what they wrong me because they do not see this." This quote demonstrates the inequality of the system, that those who are uneducated are not only in a position to be more likely to need to commit a crime such as theft, but they have greater difficulty defending themselves because under this system, the lawyer speaks for them, but they have to give their own closing argument, that the final defense comes down to the defendant. And if they are uneducated, they don't know all the fancy ways of talking, they don't know how to twist things around to make them seem innocent, they don't know how to properly defend themselves, and so they are more likely to be convicted whether they're truly guilty or not. Also, they are uneducated, and so they are looked down on because there is no jury by peers, it is jury by the higher classes judging the lower class. There's also presented the idea that not only is the system of conviction flawed, but the punishment itself is flawed. The book says the galleys make the convict what he is. And this, I think, this reminds me of In Crime and Punishment, which I know we didn't have much discussion of, but we should have, because it's my favorite book ever. And in Crime and Punishment, the great punishment is Raskolnikov's inner mind. The greatest punishment is the one dealt on man by himself. The punishment that is officially delivered by the courts, the 7 years in Siberia, is a much lesser punishment that in Crime and Punishment, because he has already repented and already become reformed, is not really much of a punishment. It will be 7 years and then he will be happy with Sonia and he'll be free. But in Les Misérables, Jean Valjean is not repentant until after he is in the galleys. And it is the galleys that make a convict a harder person, that create in him the hatred of society that may not have been there before. Before he stole because he needed food. Now he outright hates society and is more likely to commit another crime because of his hatred of society. This is again compared to how the law of humanity cannot capture God's divine justice in the way the bishop treats him. Valjean says later on, "Indulgence and kindness saved me, as severity had ruined me." The severity of the human law destroyed him, but it was through the kindness and justice of the bishop that he was redeemed and reformed. And there's this idea that prison should focus on reform, not punishment. And through punishment only, without the reform, without mercy, without justice, there is only making the criminals worse. So that's essentially what the main gist of the first tome was to me. And this theme I know is carried on throughout the book, so I may come back to it later in future videos, because I do plan to do a video for each tome of this book. I don't know if I will be posting them to this channel or my personal channel. If you have a preference, you should let me know in the comments. This isn't something that I've seen discussed. I'm in the Les Mis fandom on Tumblr, and the Les Mis fandom is mostly concerned with the Barricade Boys, and they are my favorites. But there's also a lot of other unrelated to just the Barricade that is in this book about social reform. And it's not something that I've seen discussed a lot, so I'd like to get a discussion started about it. So, anyways, yes. Goodbye.